Hello. World War II remains an object of fascination for a great many historical wargamers, and probably the most successful game to explore it is Warlord Games' Bolt Action. During the course of making a history video all about the creation and evolution of Bolt Action, I got the chance to talk to some of the important individuals who helped to create that game in the first place. Exploring the creation of Bolt Action as a range of 28mm miniatures by Paul Hicks and Simon Bargery, the acquisition by Warlord led by co-founder John Stallard, the creation of the first edition rule set by Alessio Cavatore, and the assistance offered by Rick Priestley through that process, as well as the later editions and how they evolved. This is my collection of interviews with those fine individuals about all of that wonderful history. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with the makers of Bolt Action. Simon, Paul, thanks for joining me to talk about the history of Bolt Action. Really looking forward to getting into it. I suppose the best place to start might be where you guys met. How did you sort of team up in the first place, I suppose?
It was through Gripping Beasts, wasn't it?
Through Gripping Beasts, yeah. I think you had you worked there as a sculptor at the time. I was buying ancients, so I was buying Romans and Dark Ages miniatures. And one afternoon while I was there, you said, "Do you want to make some World War II figures?"
Yeah, because I made some. I've made some figures because the only 28mm stuff out there, wasn't it? It was like Black Tree and Battle Honours UK.
Yeah, a Foundry, a little bit of Foundry Home Guard.
That's it, yeah. And I wanted some Panzer Grenadiers with the wraparound tunic, but no one made them. So I made like a couple of figures for what we were playing down our club, which was Warhammer 44. So it was just like a homebrew on the internet army list, which was fun. It was great, yeah. But they didn't make. I don't think they made a medic, and they didn't make the figure I wanted. So I just put them in a mold, and I think you saw them as well. I showed you, didn't I?
Yeah.
And what was
the cap?
Pardon? Yeah. Oh, guy with a cap. Yeah. And I can't remember what was the initial. Because you didn't suggest like I put in 500 quid's worth of.
That's it. I put £500 up, and you put £500 worth of sculpting. That was where it started.
Yeah, and
I paid the first £500 worth of bills. Yeah,
and that was our first pack. I think it was 2 packs of Germans and 2 packs of British.
Yeah, Rifles and Command.
Yeah. But because I remember us going to watch Return of the King. Was that when we got our first sculpts? Remember when we had that big outing to the cinema that time in Richmond?
Yeah. And then first show was to Sheffield, wasn't it? I think we did Sheffield.
No, but you went to Wales, didn't you? You had to drive the Gripping Beast van, didn't you?
Yeah, I do remember that one. Yeah.
And that's when the
bridge was shut. Yeah, the bridge was shut that time.
And then
we did a few intros on the Gripping Beast stand where we had a little armor, and we said this range is coming out soon. And then I think Sheffield Triples was the first.
Yeah,
we did with the table action.
Yeah, but that was, I think was it 2004 or?
Yeah, I think 2004 was when we started. Yeah.
Amazing. So it was literally born out of, okay, I'm playing Warhammer 44, right?
Yeah.
And I want some 28mm, like specific miniatures that don't exist.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so I'm always curious about that. Why 28mm? I mean, obviously it's not historically been that popular in the historical space, right? So why 28mm? Was it literally because Warhammer was, ostensibly at that scale that you were like it's a great scale? Or
yeah, well, I think for me it was because the majority of because we did dabble with 20mm like SHQ miniatures, which was like a pretty regular standard
Yeah, 1/72 was the World War II scale, wasn't it?
Yeah, but then you got but then it didn't.
Bendy plastic. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, and you get the bendy plastic figures as well, like the Airfix and the Matchbox ones. But
I think I'd always loved 25mm. All my historic stuff's big, and
yeah,
from early Games Workshop, that's what I got to at school. I just saw a video today where for the first Golden Demon, and I was at that. So it was like that's the size I consider wargaming figures is that size. I don't really do much anything else.
And I think at the club we all played with 28mm, and I really like the Black Tree, the early Nick Collier Germans and Americans that he did were really nice sculpts, and I like those compared to the 20mm figures.
Right.
But there was no tanks, was there? There's nothing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we discovered. The equipment, well, tanks, vehicles. There was nothing there. I think there was Grand Manor did some scenics, and they did like manor buildings and things like that, which looked really good. But vehicles.
Yeah, you could.
And we had a whole argument at the start, didn't we, about vehicles, about what's the right size.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so because it is quite bold then to sort of step into a space that is not, there's not a load of ranges that it's going to fit in with. It's not just like, well, you're already collecting this, so these go alongside it. You're actually sort of stepping into relatively new ground.
There was quite a bit of pushback, wasn't there, from other manufacturers? Like I think at our first show. Pardon?
It was Artisan, wasn't it? Artisan and Crusader had a
bit, they had a little bit, didn't they?
Yeah. But I think our what we said from the start was the more the merrier. That if we're in and someone finds something in your range that goes with it, then we're not in a competition. We're here to build this.
Well, I don't mean pushback is like people were thinking we were stepping on their space, but I think pushback from other people that came up to us and going, "Oh, look, 28mm World War II, that's not going to sell.
Yeah, never going to work. Yeah.
It's never going to work." And that was like our first show. I think we made 200 quid, but it paid for our accommodation and a meal out. And we thought this is the life.
All expenses paid trip to Sheffield.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean because what was the sort of like technical process then for you guys? Because you've decided to do your own miniatures range essentially. Yeah. So where did you get them cast? Like, what was it? Just
I think one of the big helpers at the start was Griffin Moulds, where we went. Stu Griffin at Griffin Moulds was excellent, wasn't he? Whatever he made stuff happen that you'd think wouldn't cast up, and his quality was impeccable, wasn't it? I think we never got into the casting or the mechanics of handling metal, and he did all that. He wasn't cheap for us, but he was always 100% perfect. Everything was useful.
Yeah, if you sent something off, you knew. There was only one time we had a hiccup, which is still evident today in the Warlords, in the bolt action range at Warlord. It was a figure that was missing out of a pack, and they still sell it as a pack of 3 as opposed to a pack of 4.
Right.
German military police. We lost one figure in transit.
Oh wow!
And we thought, we'll just sell it as a pack of 3.
I think I made a sentry box to go with it, didn't I? Or a barrier. I can't remember. Yeah, we cobbled up something else to go in the pack. I think it was a barrier.
Yeah.
With a sign on it. Yeah.
Right.
But he was absolutely amazing, wasn't he? And really helped us out at the start.
Yeah. Yeah, he sadly passed away about 10 years ago. But his partners kept the business alive, and you still get the same quality of service from them. So a lot of people use them.
Yeah.
Wow, great. I mean, what was when did the name come along then as well? Because obviously, having the miniatures is one thing, but you also need to sort of package them in a certain way. You need to put them out there, get people excited about it, and create a range with a brand. So was it always bolt action miniatures, or did that sort of evolve later?
We didn't have a name to start with. It was just make some minis, and then I think I wanted to contribute because Paul was doing the stuff I couldn't do, the artistic stuff, the creative stuff. So I wanted to do the other bit of creative and try and create a brand. And so well, I just sat there one day and thinking I need something that's punchy, there's a bit of action, a bit of, and I just thought bolt action rifle was the classic World War II. It's the rifle, isn't it? And it just sounded right. And then we had bolt action miniatures, which is BAM. We had BAM for a while. We had a little logo, and also I really wanted to keep it specific to World War II. Quite a lot of people who make figures make some goblins and some spacemen and some. And I wasn't making any figures, so I wanted to say, look, we are going to be, well, all we do World War II was our little motto, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the logo. All we do is
just keep it pure, and then if you want World War II, there's only one place to go. It'll be us.
Yeah, that is really smart, and because BAM is really fun, just as a name. But then that is really super interesting. I mean, I guess there's a broader question there about why did you never want to explore any other historical periods or any other settings or anything? Why was it World War II specifically? I mean, I know that's where you were starting from, but over the course of the sort of range, presumably there was an opportunity to explore other stuff, but you really drilled into World War II and made that the thing.
I think it's because it was quite vast and there was quite a lot that interested us anyway. I mean, we did deviate quite freely within the World War II space anyway. In figure. Oh yeah, we did a vampire. There was a German vampire and a British vampire hunter as well. A Sergeant Rock as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think for me with the name, it was, if we were going to do anything else, it would need a different name. I just wanted to put that brand focus into that thing. That was it packaged in one. And then I sort of saw it. I didn't see it getting this big, but I saw it being, that bolt action being the name for World War II. I didn't want to pollute it with some goblins or, or Dark Ages or something like that. That was it. Yeah. It was the name.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, and as you say, Paul, it is a vast period of history. There is so much in it to explore. I suppose one question is like, how did you choose what to make? Because there is so much stuff. Like, were you looking at like gaps in the market? Were you saying this is what I want to play with? What was sort of driving the decisions early on?
It was the big players, wasn't it? Like Brits, Germans, Russians.
You've got to do Germans, haven't you? You've got to do late war Germans. That's what everybody wants, and then they've got to have someone to fight against. We did that first, didn't we? And then we brought the Russians in with the Barbarossa to Berlin. We did a little sort of show on that. I can't remember which show that was, but it was the big launch of the Russians.
I think that was the Tank Museum, wasn't it? Because
might have been Bovington, yeah.
Because we made bomb dogs, didn't we?
Yeah, and a female sniper, I think. Yeah. I've still got the T-shirt with Barbarossa to Berlin on it. I still keep it.
And then we did a show in Italy, and we took a pack of figures. So I made like four different ones. One from like North Africa, one from
Nimbo, wasn't it? Nimbo, the parachute.
Yeah, parachute battalion. One in British uniform, but with the Bersaglieri feathers for later in the war when they flipped sides, and one other, I can't remember. It might have been a partisan or something. And they sold it in Italy. They sold incredibly well. And that was one show. I think that's when me and Kerry did it. The first one we did, which is in a small town in like Lombardy, Crema, and we were like, oh, this was the first night, the first day. It was a 2-day show. Me and Kerry were like, oh, this isn't going very well. And at the end, the whole show, then these guys just came up and went, I want this one, and like everything. And we just walked out with a stack of euros. We're like, this is amazing.
The foreign trips were quite good. We did Holland, didn't we? With
Antwerp,
yeah, and Crema every year. We'd go on with 15 kilos of lead in a cardboard box as our luggage.
Right.
As Simon pointed out,
go through customs.
As Simon pointed out to me, writing BAM on the edge, side of a box going through customs.
A box full of lead, yeah. So you can't.
Yeah, especially around the early noughties.
I mean, it sounds like the shows, around the Europe and the country were really important in the sort of early adoption and success of bolt action. Is that right? Was it like show driven in a way?
The first year was because we thought, well, we was kind of using it as advertising basically of what we've got. But Simon's saying that he's not very creative. He came up with this amazing display system that we had that with those perspex tubes, and it had like little perspex discs of each code of figures that we had, and there were these 4 towers that sat. It was Sheffield, wasn't it?
We had one at Sheffield, and then we ended up with 4, maybe 6. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you built a new display along the front, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Simon, I think he's doing himself a disservice saying he's not creative. And then you produced all the start of our vehicle range as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I think when we started, there were no vehicles. People had 148th. There's a bit of that around, and there was some die-cast bits and bobs. I think Corgi did a bit, didn't they? I don't know what scale.
Yeah. Their range of stuff. Yeah.
So I can't remember what the first one, BA64, I think, out of plastic card.
Yeah.
So I built, and the Universal Carrier, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was...
a few vehicles. And the big boat. There was a big German Russian boat.
Yeah, the Broncator. Yeah. I remember you called
it was fun building vehicles. I could actually make something that was going to sell. It was good.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so obviously the collection, the range is expanding. You're putting vehicles out there. You're putting different nations and different armies in there. At some point, you also created a sort of small rule set as well to go with it, right? So people.
Wow, that's a deep cut.
Yeah. So I think it was USSR, so it was ultra simple skirmish rules, and I thought about it about a year ago, and I thought I don't even have a copy of that. I thought it was quite inventive at its time because it had missions. It was a small board, and you had these missions you had to do. And I didn't have a copy, and I went on a forum-led adventure, and someone sent me a PDF of my rules. So it was really good to look back.
Yeah,
I don't think we sold a few, I guess, but it wasn't really. It's nothing like the rule book you get now.
No,
it's interesting though, isn't it? Because that's so. Were most people, do you think, buying the miniatures to like just to collect, to paint, to model, rather than to play with?
No, there was a few rule sets floating around because there was I Ain't Been Shot Mum by the Two Fat Hardies, and then Great Escape Games. They started off. What was their rules?
There were some classics like Spearhead, or there were some classics that were out there anyway that people just went up a scale and said, "Oh, I'm going to do the same rules, but I'm having these big guys." But there was. I think a lot of people were playing. I mean, there was that group of. Do you remember the teacher with the school kids that did the after school club that used to come at Salute? Used to come running. Big horde of kids used to come running up to the stand.
Yeah, that was great. Our first proper Salute. We were like at the top of the escalator at the Olympia. The last time they did it at Olympia, and all these kids ran up, and I was like, "Oh, they've obviously sort of misplaced this." And then it was when we released our Americans because we had pattern, didn't we?
Yeah.
We went, "Excuse me, can I have a pattern, please?" And then a long list of Americans was like, "Yeah, this is amazing."
I always imagine there's a bit of a, I suppose it's an anxiety around doing trade shows and stuff, and I imagine an elation as well when you do sell a load of stuff. But is there like actually going to the shows and to you've got all your stock, and then it is almost out of your hands at that point, right? You've done everything you can do. Once you're set up, it's whether or not people just like what you've got that's going to determine if you're successful. Like like what's the feel of doing a show?
Absolutely. I think there's some. We did the first couple of years. We did a lot.
Yeah,
and we were sat in some without anything to do, weren't we?
Yeah. Which one was it? We did 2 back to back, or was it back to back? what was that when you did a DBA competition and you
I think
you went off for the whole day playing DBA or running a DBA competition. I got stuck with two blokes standing in front of the stand.
I think I think that was Derby maybe, and then I came back in the afternoon, and the guy came around and said, "Right, have you got your 30 quid to pay for?"
Oh, that was Derby because we had such a poor day the first day, and then we went out, and then I think we ended up in a nightclub, didn't we? And we got back, and then we were I was quite hungover the next day, and then can we have your fee? Like, it was about 90 quid or something. It was that's 2 days we're not going to get back.
At least you had a night out to remember.
But yeah, and I think that was definitely one show where everyone, well, these are nice. Shame they're not 20 mil.
Yeah.
By the end
I
of
think
it,
there's so much positive though when you meet people and they're coming up to you and saying, "Oh, that's great. I love that. I want one of those. Can I have?" It is a massive positive boost to you, and it's more than just selling miniatures. You're talking to people, and they love this, they like that. I mean, everybody has got their own idea. Can we have the guy that's doing this, and can we have the Greeks, and so you have to sort of you take note, and temper it down a bit. But yeah, it's very, very positive experience, especially when you get into the scene and the traders and the setting up. It's a really, really good crowd.
Yeah, they were fun.
Yeah,
definitely. And we had some great laughs as well. Like on the Antwerp trips and stuff.
Yeah.
Was there ever a point when if you've done a show and it's just no one's bought anything, or you've had hardly any sales, and you're looking at things and sort of saying, okay, maybe this isn't going to be successful? Was there ever a moment of like hesitation and doubt?
I don't think so. No.
You're always doubting yourself, Paul. I think, but you've got there's no one like you for your creativity in 28 mil world. You're like a one of a kind. You're a man machine. Oh. But yeah, I don't think we ever said because it was always something we were going to do. It wasn't something we were going to say now it's not working. It was something we were going to do because we loved it. And if we made 30 quid, we had a great time. And if we made £3,000, we had a great time. It was fun, wasn't it?
I think you could tell if a show wasn't going to be good because you didn't see your regulars.
Yeah,
because there was a couple of blokes that used to come round. One was quite big, and the other one was really slender, and he was in the army, wasn't he? Yeah. I saw them when I was at the last show at Partisan recently, and they still look exactly the same, and it's still the same sort of banter and stuff. So I think we worked well as a double act, didn't we? On the stands, that people kind of, we sort of generated our own fun, and if things weren't going as well as we'd hoped at a show, that show just got knocked off the list, and we didn't go back. Thought it's not for us. But I don't think we ever felt it was because people didn't like our product, because it was selling on the web store. So you'd always have that as your backup. I
don't think we ever. The sales just went. There was never a point where they dropped. I think even when we went through the initial financial crisis, it just went up through that, didn't it? I think people they couldn't buy a new car, so they'd go and get 20 quid's worth of minis instead.
Yeah.
Those little purchases stayed big,
Well, yeah, I was curious about that actually, and just how the sales did build up over time. I mean, was it just a steady line of continued success, or were there fits and starts, or what were you seeing in terms of like sales on the web store and elsewhere?
It just went. It was like a 45-degree line.
Yeah,
right. But the 5 years we had it just went up. I had my wife at the time. We ended up employing her to run the business from home, to do all the order fulfillment. The garage was just a big bench down one side with all the stock and the packaging to be able to put it in. It just went up and up and up. And I think we reached a point where John and Paul came along at the right time, where it was just becoming, do we go into it? People were doing plastics. And we were thinking plastic is a big, a mold, we can afford a mold. A plastic mold is is tens of thousands of pounds. That's almost like a remortgage. Do we hit it seriously, or do we say we've done enough?
Yeah.
When Paul phoned up and said, I've got a friend John who wants to make us an offer, I think it's exactly the right point, wasn't
it? Yeah.
It was that teetering on the edge of remortgage the house and going to plastics, or let it go. And it was hard to let it go, but it was massive relief, I think, as well. It was a big part.
Yeah, there was definitely a bolt action size shape missing from my life for a bit when you're trying to get round doing stuff. And there was a sort of a transitional period where people would still try and get in contact with you and ask questions about it. Because I was still, at that time, Warlords said that they, would want to keep me on doing stuff for them to supplement the ranges. So, I mean, I still had a little bit of an attachment to the range.
Yeah. Yeah, because so this was John Stallard, Paul Sawyer, Warlord Games. They've come over. I mean, obviously that, like you say, that the scaling up was reaching that point of investment and actually turning it into perhaps not a more serious business, but obviously a bigger undertaking.
Yeah.
They already had something in place. They'd been working for a few years at that point, right?
Yeah, because Paul Sawyer came. He came up to our stand when we were at Partisan one year and bought a load of paras, and we were chatting away. And then, because I'd already done some Roman bits for Warlords, so I already had a sort. It wasn't like a cold.
Sure.
They made like a play for us out of the blue. There was a relationship that had started, that was between us to start with, because I'd been doing some sculpting for them. So that it wasn't like we're going to make a power grab for a 28mm cut. There was kind of a build up.
Right. Well, so was that like just the odd kind of conversation here and there, and scoping out whether or not you guys were open to a conversation about selling?
I think so. I can't really remember how it went. Really,
it was reasonably quick, wasn't it? I think it was part of my life then. I didn't expect it to go. It was, my house was full of the stuff and the garage was full of it, and we had the weekends planned, and it was part of my life. And then when you said, "Oh, I've got someone who might be interested," it was like, "Oh wow, yeah, that it could just be gone." And they turned up on one weekend with some vans, and it just took it all. And it just went in one weekend.
Don't forget, we had quite a celebratory night the night before.
We did have a good night, yeah. But I think it was the right decision. I think for me, they were a professional outfit that I wanted. It wouldn't have been good for me to go to a garden shed, like another garage like mine. I think they were the next step, and they made. I mean, they must have put thousands and tens of thousands of pounds into it, because they made massive investment, and it took off. It was going that way, but if it had stayed with us, it would have tailed off, I think. But because we just didn't have unless we'd gone for it, we didn't have the cash to get plastics, and so for me it was going to someone who would treat it like I always wanted it to be a proper thing, like a brand and a thing, and that exists, not just someone's making some figures. It was
well, it is.
Like a brand, a brand. It needs to be a brand. That was,
Yeah, which it definitely is, right? And it has only continued to grow and continue to succeed from that investment based on the work that you guys had done, and then the work that Warlord were able to put into it as well. I mean, what's it like sort of seeing where it is now, just having launched a third edition? It's bigger than ever. Like you say, loads of investment, loads of plastics, a massive range. Like, do you sort of, you look on it and it's like a proud moment, I imagine, right?
Every now and again I have to remind myself that we started that.
I think walking into a shop and seeing a wall of boxes with bolt action written on it, thinking, I can remember the day I thought, but I need a name. And then that was it. Yeah, that's the name. Yeah, it is really good. It's really nice. And it's also nice to see it has gone, and it has gone big. something we created something that could get that big. Yeah, this is fun.
It was quite. I was we were at I still go to the show in Antwerp with a group of friends, and one guy was a really close friend of mine was chatting away, and he said, "Oh, someone mentioned about me being part of with Simon starting Bolt Action." He was like, "No, really?" I went, "Yeah, that was Guy. You remember Boise, don't you?"
Yeah.
Yeah, Boise put our friend Toby to rights about who started. Yeah, where Bolt Action started. Yeah.
I mean, I think having the rule book coalesced that whole, and it's like, I think when we were doing it, there was, what was the 15mm? Flames of War, wasn't it?
Yes.
Flames of War was big. They had the rule book, they had the figures, and that package, the stand full of blisters and the rule book and all the supplements, that package, that was where we should have gone, where we would have gone next, I think. But
yeah,
I'm not a rule writer. I don't think so. We would have had to get in. I think we were at the point where we had to take on staff, and that was we get serious.
I mean, at that point, we did have where we had the late Richard Ansell was doing stuff for us, wasn't
he? Yeah.
He did the Italian range, didn't he? And Finns. Yeah. French as well. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a lovely chap.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about it was the things that grew up around us, like Nigel with his Spanish Civil War stuff.
Yeah.
Crouchy. Crouchy with his bits and bobs. Yeah, it was good to see. And it was the straight line beardy guy who did the 88.
Ian Armstrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Just seeing those characters, getting to know them, seeing them grow or not grow or stay as they are. So Ian, he's still as he was, isn't he?
Yeah, he still makes. He still does all the vehicles for Empress Miniatures.
So Empress came out of it as well, didn't it? As well, out of us, but it came out at the same time. Yeah, it was lovely seeing that grow.
Mm. Yeah. Did you ever think about sort of tackling some other historical period or a brand new range together and sort of a Bolt Action equivalent for something else? Or were you happy that you've done it now? You've succeeded in that space.
I bought some molds for 10mm Napoleonics when we finished for a while, and I did a bit of that, but it wasn't the same really. It was more of a pain than it was fun. So yeah, I did a bit of 10mm Napoleonics for a while, and then I'd really like to have a retirement range one day, but I need to think up what it is. I'd like to have something that I could continue to sell when I was not working, but I don't know what it is yet. Obviously, Paul would be the man to make it for me. But
well, we have that's always been because we have stayed firm friends since, haven't we?
Yeah.
Even though we're quite a distance apart, we're still great mates, and we every time we get together, there's always chatting about what we could do.
Fantastic. So watch this space. You never know. Could be something down the line. Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you both taking the time to chat to me about Bolt Action. It's an incredible story, and the work that you did has really blossomed into something really special. It's taken on a major life of its own. John, thank you for joining me to chat about Bolt Action and Warlords taking on of the Bolt Action range and sort of turning it into what it became and where it's going next. So I guess the first thing to start with is just, I suppose, where was Warlord before Bolt Action? Well, what was the sort of the state of the company, and what were you working on when you were deciding, okay, we're going to take a look at World War II?
Oh, that's a great question, Jordan. We set up Warlord, Paul Sawyer and me, when we left Workshop 17 years ago now. We're in our 18th year, I think. And Paul and I had always wanted to do a box set of Romans because we thought hard plastic Romans had never been done before, and that would be really cool. So we started working on those, and we're using Bob Naismith as a designer and using Renedra, the plastics guys, ex-Games Workshop plastic guys. We came out with this plastic box of Romans. Unbeknown to us, the Perry twins were working on their hard plastic American Civil War. So we were both inventing hard plastic wargaming 28mm at the same time without knowing each other were doing it. And the Perrys beat us to the punch by about 6 weeks, but they were very good about it. And so we had our Romans, and then obviously you have to have some bad guys. So we did some Celts to go with it. And that's pretty much all we had. We had Praetorians and some veterans, which are tiny modifications we made to the plastic frame so we could get a larger box set range out there. And then my other passion is English Civil War. I did reenactment for 35 years in the sealed knot. So English Civil War is my period. So, and again, by choosing the English Civil War, everybody's kit was the same on both sides, which means you can do royalist and parliamentarian, just swap the flags around and you get, but if you do the artwork differently, you can get a royalist set and a parliament set, etc., etc. So you're starting to build up a shelf space on retailers' shelves. So that was the cunning plan there. But Paul and I are both rabid World War II fans, and we've got large 6mm armies and 15mm armies, and yeah, World War II is our thing. And it was Paul, really, I think, first spotted BAM, as we used to call them, bolt action miniatures, or BAM, as it was called at the time, believe it or not. I think he saw them at a show, and Paul knew Paul Hicks and Simon Bargery, and we met them at shows, and Paul used to work with me at Games Workshop. He's one of our excellent store managers, and perhaps an area manager, but certainly a great store manager, and a fantastic painter. And he painted my Warhammer fantasy army for me. Absolutely superb. Still, and my Empire army. Still got that on display. And we looked at their models thinking those are really nice. And more importantly, they're done in 28mm, which is what we thought that's what World War II should be, because nobody else was really doing 28mm. Some people were doing 1/48, funnily enough. 1/48 type scale. That had a couple of aficionados going for it. I think Black Tree did some, maybe 28mm. But when we saw that, we started to. I said, or both of us said, we need a World War II game, and that got us thinking, and we started looking at their models, and probably thought about writing a set of rules. Would have been the first thing we'd do, rather than actually the miniatures. So that's how it came about, really. Right. If that answers your question.
It does indeed, yeah. I mean, and it throws up a few interesting questions, I suppose, as well, John. So, I mean, are there particular challenges with World War II miniatures and miniature ranges that ruled it out as the first thing? Like, I'm curious, if you and Paul were both really into World War II, why was that not where Warlord started?
It's a very good question. I think we're probably thinking of selling masses of miniatures, ranked up miniatures is where we're going from, rather than, I think we probably thought it was the commercial thing to do. You have to sell an awful lot of individual Panzer Grenadiers to make the same as you would a Roman legion, if you see what I mean.
Sure, yeah.
So I imagine that's where we're coming from to begin with. Because, and arguably, we lost a couple of years doing other stuff. Because bolt action is certainly the bulk of what we sell now, and it's very signature Warlord Games.
Sure, yeah.
So it's a jolly good question. We could have started with World War II, but we didn't.
Yeah, I suppose you lose that economy, like you were saying, though, of the same forces on both sides, because there's a visual difference.
Well, we're also very unsure whether hard plastic historical would sell, right. And we thought. Everybody loves a Roman, so we think, well, not necessarily everybody loves a Panzer Grenadier or a Russian trooper. And then you think, well, which one would we do? Germans or British or Yanks or whoever. There's a bit more there. Whereas Romans, you've already got a market for Romans in 28mm. People have had them for 30 years. Minifigs and everybody else, Foundry, Perry, whatever. So we knew there was a market for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, you mentioned the sort of the scale of bolt action miniatures being quite relevant. So they were 28mm already. I mean, what is it about? I mean, obviously, a lot of historicals has been done at smaller scales, historically speaking. So a lot of 15 mil and other scales as well. Those bolt action minis are 28 mil. Like, what is it about that scale that is special, do you think? And why does World War II deserve to be sort of done at that scale?
Well, I think people avoided 28 mil because of the notion that weapon ranges are so vast that it might look ridiculous on a tabletop,
Right.
only shooting 24 inches. And I think that got in people's heads. So 15 mil and smaller looked a bit more realistic, inverted commas, though clearly, but the game we were looking for was more a skirmish game. And if you're collecting miniatures, it was basically God's scale. I said to Paul, it's got to be 28 mil, can't be anything else. We've come from Games Workshop stable. If we want to get people into World War II gaming, it should be the same size as, of course, Workshop models now about 32 mil now, but there we go. But you get my point. It's a 28 mil, a bit more heroic in size, and we can get a lot of character into 28 mil. And when we designed the game, my brief, this was my brief rather than Paul's on this one, was we want a game that looks and feels exactly like Rogue Trader when Rogue Trader came out all those 30 years ago, whenever it might have been now. Whereas you'd have perhaps up to 30 Marines, a tank of some description, an armored car, and some sort of gun. And that was the brief, a platoon against another platoon, and the odd tank coming in. And the BAM range, as it was, they probably had about that. Paul and Simon had put together a few tanks or vehicles, a rather eclectic bunch, and whatever I think they fancied, I think, rather than the obvious ones you'd start with. But so that's what we followed. So when we went to Alessio, because he'd been made redundant from Games Workshop, we said, right, Alessio, we want you to rewrite Rogue Trader. And he said, yes, no problem at all. What we didn't know was he knew nothing about World War II.
Right.
We only found out when we went down to see Osprey, because we did this in conjunction with Osprey Publishing. And on the way down, he said, I don't know anything about World War II. And there was a bit of a frigid silence in the car as I said, what do you mean? And he said, no knowledge of it at all. I said, right, shut up in the meeting then and just nod. Now, I should point out that over the last 15 years, Alessio now knows an awful lot about World War II.
I'll bet, yeah.
So, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really interesting then. So you sort of taking a few of the sort of ideas or the playbook almost of that early Citadel stuff and kind of saying, right, let's do it at this scale. Let's write a skirmish war game in this way. I mean, what from the business side of things, what was the decision, I guess, to bring in that bolt action range rather than just starting from scratch and just saying, right, we're going to do our own thing from zero, as it were?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think once we evaluated, once we thought about it, it was just too cool a notion not to crack on and do it. I don't think we wanted to compete with Paul and Simon because they're good guys. We like them, and we got on very well. So the last thing I wanted to do was go and design ranges, to take them on. So instead, we thought, well, because they had real jobs as well. This is something they were doing in their spare time, in their own houses and things. For goodness sake, they're doing a magnificent job considering they had other jobs. And so very quickly we got to negotiations with, well, why don't we buy out BAM? And so we got together with Simon and Paul and struck a deal for taking all the molds and the miniatures and everything and take it away and pay them royalties, for a set time. And we did a deal that everybody was happy with, and that meant we could crack on immediately and start designing our ranges from there and filling in the gaps.
Right.
So that was the primer and the petrol pump, that very much so. And they were nice models, a lot of people even now prefer the models from 17 years ago to the ones we do. It's they were nice models.
Yeah.
But they were very incomplete ranges, and they'd be the first to agree with that. There was a very tight ranges, shall we say.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And then what was the nature of the deal with Osprey? Like, why bring them into the mix?
It gets a bit cloudy after all this time. It would be me. It would be me saying, we got on very well with Osprey. They're a nice bunch of guys. And we sort of met, you meet them from various shows and things. And obviously they are the go-to guys for historical books. And I just thought that we'd get a much bigger and better distribution worldwide if we went and did it with Osprey, because they sell all around the world and have done for 50 years. And what does little Warlord know about selling to the world? Because we had no trade accounts, we had nothing really, almost nothing. So yeah, I think it would have been a smart commercial decision to say they can make the book look lovely for a start, because Osprey do. They've got all that artwork which they've had from 50 years of various stuff. And they were looking into getting into wargaming as well. They were saying, "Oh, what's the wargames world like?" I said, "Well, hard work. All we had was black powder at the time, and hail season." I said, "It's blooming hard work, but if we get together and put together a great World War II game written by Alessio, who's and Rick was involved as well to a degree, and say it's from that stable, then I'm sure it'll do really well." So it was to enhance the distribution of World War II gaming, and it worked very well. It was still one of their best-selling books every time they come out. It's on its third edition now, and Osprey are very happy with it. And
Sure,
they
yeah.
do all the army books as well, of course. So they know they've got some bestsellers coming in. So win-win.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned Alessio coming in to work on the rules and the brief that you'd given him. Do you remember much of that process that Alessio had to go through? Sort of from your perspective, looking over his shoulder?
No, not a great deal, because he's self-starter, old Alessio. What he did do was listen to the brief very well, because he's a professional, and didn't try and reinvent the wheel. But what he did come up with was the innovative order dice system. That was one of him. I think it was just him, perhaps him and Rick, but certainly it wasn't one of mine. But when he showed me what it was, I thought, that's a winner. That's great. That's a much better way of playing a game, because it's got, you have to pay attention all the way through playing bolt action, because it's not you go, I go. It could be any go. And we knew that was going to be a winner as soon as we saw that.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously that's a hallmark of the game, and certainly something that people really love about it, I think, isn't it? And you mentioned Rick being involved as well.
Well, Rick's never not involved. Alessio is despite being a superb rules writer, he's very respectful to people like Rick who have gone before, and he says he's learned so much from Rick that he'd probably go around to Rick and say, "I've got this idea about this," and Rick will sit there wisely and not say a great deal and say, "Well, it's up to you, Alessio." And then Alessio say, "Well," and then Rick will say, "Well, if it was me, I'd do this, 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 and this." And the secret is to listen to the wisdom of Rick. He doesn't, there's great wisdom in Rick when it comes to these things, and to ignore him at your peril.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but generally, Alessio, I say he just started reading up on World War II immediately, and we knew we got a winner straight away.
Yeah. I mean, do you recall how it went when you first launched? What was the sort of impact on the marketplace, I guess?
Oh, it's instantly good. It was. It was just a book to begin with. If I remember, there wasn't box sets. It would have been just a single book.
Right.
God, it's taking me back now in my mind. But and we'd done some. The figure ranges started to get good because we added to all the BAM stuff. We started adding frantically to them, to getting. I think Paul did some. Paul Hicks actually finished off some ranges for us, but then we got other designers in as well, including Wojtek, who's one of our current sculptors from Poland. He'd been sculpting models for Black Tree miniatures in 28mm. Yeah, Black Tree. They made some. So we pinched him and moved him over from Poland, and he became our #1 bolt action sculptor. And he's still with us now. It's 16 years on, which is great. We went for a style. We went for the Warlord style, which, for us, we always go for where, if for historical accuracy on one wing, they've got to be right and accurate because people are very nerdy about World War II, quite rightly. And then there's action and adventure, which is the Games Workshop bit, and it's where the two touch there.
Right.
That's what I really want, of action, excitement, and accuracy. Is where it's got to be, and full of character. Now, not everybody likes that, and I get that. Some people find that a bit exaggerated or whatever, and that's okay. But that's what Warlord and Bolt Action is, and take it or leave it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I imagine it's quite a tough line to walk there, isn't it? Like you say, you do want to retain accuracy, and it's a historical war game, and you're sort of drawing on that. So people want to feel like they are getting a representation of that, whether they choose, whether it is the Brits or the Yanks or whatever they're playing. But then if it is just too straight and too sort of exact, I suppose, a representation, then you're going to lack some of that character potentially, right?
Well, you do, and it's in all gaming, you're compromising. Occasionally somebody will write in and say, you say the range of a submachine gun is 24 inches. Well, that's ridiculous. In reality, it'd be 400 meters, they might say. And you think, well, yeah, we know that. We do know that. Honestly, we do know our stuff. But you have to scale it down to people's tabletops and common sense. And then other people will argue, and they're correct, of course. They'll say, well, there aren't any hand grenades in Bolt Action. The models have carried them and they look great, but we don't use them in the game. They're used in hand-to-hand combat effectively. It's when people close. Both sides are assumed to have grenades, and they kind of cancel each other out, if you know what I mean. Both sides are lobbing grenades. So that is another step which is historically untrue, but otherwise it just gets to a grenade lobbing fest, and it doesn't make a great game, and that's the compromises you go through each time. That's what we think anyway.
Yeah, I wonder, are there any other sort of those kinds of challenges or compromises with a World War II game in particular, where you're having to say, okay, actually, we're not going to be able to represent that, or we're going to have to introduce something to fill a gap in a range that didn't exist or didn't exist in this way, or those kinds of things. Do you have to make those sort of decisions often?
Yeah, constantly making those decisions, and we're in the third iteration now of the game. It's, you put in a rule which you think is pretty cool, and then some players go and break it, shall we say. You think, I hadn't thought people would do that. In the first one, lorries or trucks are being used to ram tanks or hide your troops behind them as you advance slowly against the enemy, hiding behind a Bedford truck, which just wouldn't happen. You think, oh, for God's sake, who's going to be driving the Bedford truck, eh? If you're going to die horribly. It's a good tactic if you're allowed to do it, but that's clearly mad. So then you second edition, you make transports. If the enemy's closer, if you've got enemy closer to a transport, then they just capture it. You shouldn't have taken it so far. Things like that. Or the reconnaissance rule, the recce rule, which I insisted went into the first edition of the game because I thought it was a great rule. Well, it was a good idea, but I hadn't thought it through. And so that got abused quite quickly. So that's been changed a couple more times now to a more satisfying answer. And funnily enough, Alessio told me so at the time, and he was right, I was wrong. He's a professional games writer, I'm not. So we've got a good rule now, though.
Yeah. And do you recall the sort of how the range expanded through that first edition? I mean, what were your key areas to grow the range? Were you looking at specific nations or?
Yeah, this would have been Paul's bag. He's our studio man, Paul Sawyer. So Paul is he was in charge of that, and obviously went straight for Germans to begin with. Just got Bob Naismith to make us a German box set, and then it would have been, I think, Americans, then British. Almost all of those we've replaced since, because we've just improved and learned how to make the models better. They all had separate weapons, which we thought was terrific, so people could field different weapons, but in the end they just don't fit the hands very well, and they look very blocky. So in fact you get a worse model in the end by trying to give too much variation. Right. So we've learned that over the years. But now we probably do 7 or 8 German plastic sets, Fallschirmjäger, Winter Germans, SS, Blitzkrieg. And we've just got another one coming out, Africa Corps, of course. So you can mix and match from probably about 8 German box sets now, and all the weapons and heads can be swapped around. And obviously our best-selling box sets is Germans,
Right.
of course, even in Germany, funnily enough. And secondly, it's Americans, then British or British and Commonwealth, then Russians, then Japanese, who do quite well, then Italians.
Right.
So it's quite, so you kind of do it about common sense kind of tells you where you're going to go. I'd say it's common sense. But, I probably would have guessed that would have been the sales ratios, and it has been so far. The last one we put out was a French army, which has done very well.
Right.
We probably did that a little bit late, but they're really nice. And I'd like to do Polish plastic. That'd be quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested actually just around the plastic side of things, of course, because I know you do obviously a huge plastic range and still do traditional like metal casting and resin stuff as well. But is there what's the balance in terms of how much do we want to put out in plastic and how much do we want to push that side of things versus going for metals? Like, is there an art to that, I suppose?
Yeah, I think art is the great term. I started putting together a Japanese army just last week. The sales guys challenged me to say, all right, you're really quick at getting models done. Please do a Japanese army for me. And I found it quite fiddly putting these Japanese models together, separate arms, separate weapon arms and different heads. And then, so I was struggling taking a good hour to put, I don't know, just 10 men together. And I found it a bit of a strain. And I hadn't even put on all the equipment, the trenching tools and gas mask cases and hand grenades and all the other bits and bobs. By then I was thinking, hard work this is. It just made me rethink myself about, so what I then went to my store and bought some Japanese jungle fighters, which are in metal, one-piece castings. And I was much more at home with those. So I could get those painted quickly. I mean, multi-part is great. Unless you're doing whole platoons, it can be a nuisance. We found that, though, with our Napoleonics. When Napoleonics first came out with the Perrys and Victrix and ourselves, it was a bit of a race to see how many bits you could make your models in. And it was considered very flash, to have separate muskets, separate this, separate that. And that's great if you're making 10 men. But when you're making a battalion of 30, and then you realize you've got to do it 10 more times to get a brigade, it's just madness. So then you think, well, that's not quite so clever. And so it is a compromise and an art about which ones to go for and how many parts they should be in. We found out very quickly that you have to have the weapons in the hands, molded into the hands to make it look comfortable, like they're actually gripping the weapons properly rather than just laying them in there. But that's things you learn as you go.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we've got still lots of plans for more metal and more resin, single piece models, and lots more, and a good few more plastic box sets. Yeah.
Right. Great. Yeah. And the second edition, I mean, you mentioned some of the sort of changes that came in, revising things and learning lessons, I suppose, from the sort of first edition. But was there any sort of major ambition going into that second edition and sort of how we want to move it forward in this way?
Oh, we knew we had a great game from the first one, but then we realised it was a bit tatty around the edges, so it needed a definite clearing up and a tidy up. I can't remember all the changes. Other ones would be snipers. They've changed a couple of times as well. And then more recently, the commands, using officers to command more than one unit at a time has made it a far more challenging game. It's really quite smart now, quite clever. But each time working with Osprey, we've been able to make the game look better. And the third edition one we just put out just 6 weeks ago, it's been reprinted twice already, and been very well received. What's important when you're doing it is never to make anybody's models redundant. Other companies, shall remain nameless, may have changed the rules over the years. So anything you might have spent your hundreds of pounds worth of buying whatever for is then widowed. and people get very upset about that. I can see how they might. So again, Alessio's been very careful to anybody's armies can still be used. You don't have to set them on fire or put them on eBay anymore. So that's important. We're working through the army lists, the army books. So there's a get you by army list for everything in the main game. But we've got working on the Armies of Germany book, and that looks very splendid at the moment. That's coming out in January, and then we'll work through every 2 months all the various armies. Then it'll be Americans, then British, then Russians,
right,
etc., etc. And they'll be more detailed. They'll look more luxurious. They'll be very nice. They'll be well thought out books.
Yeah. Well, that was something I was going to ask about, actually, because looking through the third edition, there seems to have been a real push for, I suppose, almost the sort of accessibility of the game and sort of bringing new people in and making it quite easy to step through and learn as you play, all of that sort of stuff. Was that like a key part of the remit for the third edition?
That was very much a brief from me and Paul. I thought the first and second edition, the army lists were very restrictive. It was very waggy fingered. So you can take one gun, one mortar, one howitzer, one tank, one of this, one of that. I think it seemed very parsimonious, and also importantly, it's a bit like what if you're fighting against a heavy machine gun platoon? There might be 4 heavy machine guns there, not one. So so what we insisted with Alessio, and Alessio was great at doing it, was to break up the army list. So you can now, if you want to field 4 King Tigers, you can. Now, obviously, in the rules, if you want to capture any objectives, you need infantry. So it means you probably can't win the game if you've only got armor. But that's what you want to do. Great, but you're not going to win. Equally, if you want to field up to 6 mortars, I suppose you can, or find a way of doing it, but you're also a very good target for the enemy artillery and snipers and everything else, and you'll have a great 3 or 4 turns, but then you'll get wiped out because they'll know where you are. So breaking up the army lists has given people far more freedoms to do different armies and different reconnaissance platoons, and it's a much more open game.
Right.
And it's getting very formulaic otherwise.
Right, sure. Have you, I mean, maybe it's too early to sort of say, I suppose, but I guess over the last couple of years, have you seen a growth in new players coming in and sort of the historical market sort of growing and changing?
Oh, hugely. I mean, Bolt Action's doing it's selling out, which is lovely. So many people are coming in from 40k. It's a great 40k bridge game. It's fast moving. The models are great. The rules are simple, innovative, and the pricing's so much different. Shall we say? I mean, it's an attraction. I can't pretend it's not. And people are in a store in, let's say, in Miami, and they're in a big game store, and they're playing their 40k game, and then next to them are some guys playing World War II. Because of films and video games now, people know what a Tiger tank is. Anybody knows what one is, and they say, "Hey, that's cool. That's a Tiger tank, isn't it?" They go, "Oh yeah, it's dead good in the game," and and it's only $35 as well, not $90 for another tank, which shall we say? So we're getting a lot of people crossing over to say that, because World War II is still cool. It's a cool period. I don't know why that all is, but it just is, so it's an obvious in for historical people.
Yeah.
And you don't need hundreds of models to paint. You get by with 20 guys and 2 tanks. Off you go.
Sure,
off to the races.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. It does sort of still has a place in the sort of, for want of a better phrase, almost the popular culture, isn't it? The World War II still seems quite relevant. You still see movies and games and stuff like that coming out about it. So there's definitely an interest still there to explore that period of history.
Very much so, and it's still seen, again, you could argue otherwise, but as goodies against baddies. I mean, I know all the arguments, but it's still a good war against bad people, and people can get that. It helps them in their heads, I think.
Yeah. I mean, what's the sort of vision going forward then for Bolt Action? Where would you like to take it next?
Well, I think the changes that Alessio has made is going to keep us going for a number of years on this one. I'd like to do well. Obviously, in the UK, when we talk about the Second World War, we say it's 1939 to 1945. If you're American, of course, it's 41 to 45. But if you're Chinese, they'd say 36 or whatever to 45. It depends where you start the Second World War, doesn't it? And we could also say Spanish Civil War. That was a precursor. So, in the UK here, we are wholly unaware, I am, of the massive battles that were taking place in Manchuria and China and all those things in the late 30s. I mean, massive battles, far bigger than our armies could ever think of, were taking part, and we haven't even scratched that yet.
Right.
So that would be somewhere to visit, I think. Poles, we've done them in resin and metal, and they look very nice, but haven't done them in plastic yet. Finns, that'd be nice to see. Romanians, there's still quite a lot to go at. And then there'll be more skirmishy type games. Perhaps we could make a smaller game in scope, more detailed, if you like, and perhaps a larger one, more battalion level.
Right.
It's a period that keeps on giving. Plastic tanks. What have we got next coming out of that? We've got an Italian armored car, which looks fantastic, from Italieri. We do tanks from Italieri in Italy. They make them for us.
Right.
We've got a Becka for the Yanks and a Katyusha for the Russians. So more plastic kits to come out.
Right.
And then it bleeds through into Conflict 47 as well, which is another of our games, which is assuming that 1945 never happened, and some science fiction wacky stuff happens, and conflict carries on till 1947, which is far more fantastical. We'll be working on that as well, with very similar rules and similar world, but with more wonderful creatures and technology. So that's another place to take it.
Sure.
That's where we can take Bolt Action, but. Bolt Action itself it's just a great game. I can't think of many changes that I'd make to it now. I think we've adjusted it just beautifully now.
Yeah. You think the third edition has sort of found its real stride, and it's...
I think it'll be a long time before we have any need for a fourth edition. Yeah, it's just seems to have got it right now. And we put out a starter set as well. Which we haven't done before. We've done some introductory sets, shall we say, which have got models in and the game. But this one we've got absolutely an introductory set with a stripped down set of rules and 2 squads in and just a little bit of terrain. And very much do this, get started, off you go. So and at a much cheaper price.
Sure. Again, that sort of leans into that accessibility and let's bring new people into the hobby, doesn't it?
It does, very much so. And that's the plan. Get people playing World War II. It's great.
Great stuff. Well, John, that's been fantastic to talk to you about the history of Bolt Action and sort of how it's evolved. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, come back anytime you want to know more. I always enjoy chatting to you. And I just wish I could remember a bit more about it all. But if I think of anything, I'll give you a shout.
Please do, yeah. Alessio, thank you for joining me to chat a bit about your work on Bolt Action. I suppose the sort of starting place might be where did you become involved? How did you first get involved in Bolt Action to start with?
Well, it was distant, 2010, something like that. And I had left Games Workshop and I was setting up businesses, Riverhorse, with the idea of doing my own games, but also of doing services for other people. And indeed, both Warlord Games and Mantic jumped on me. I was like, right games for us. I was like, okay. So in the case of bolt action, basically Warlord had just acquired the bolt action miniatures and wanted to do a game system, and and basically I was recruited because they wanted it to be competitive and so basically suitable for organized play competition. And they said, "Oh no, if we want it to be written by somebody who's a bit nasty." That does tournaments and stuff like that, and we think you're the right man. I was like, "Oh, thank you." I don't know, is that a compliment? Um, yeah, so basically, I was given a task, and there was a big, long briefing period where me, John Stallard, and Paul Sawyer had meetings about what we wanted the game to be like, the experience. And normally, when I'm commissioned something like that, I ask a million questions because often I find that even the customer doesn't really know what they want. So by asking them lots and lots of questions, the project takes shape. It becomes a bit more. I would say, how many players, how long is the experience, how many toy soldiers or vehicles I have on the table, how big is my army on average. Of course, it's all a bit finger in the air at the time, but you try to narrow it down and go, what's the experience like? How long does a game last? Yeah, and do you use dice? You don't use dice cards. You narrow down as much as possible a brief, and then after that period, then I started writing, testing, writing, and the first edition was created. And of course, Rick Priestley got involved at some point when he left Games Workshop, just thereabout as we were doing this as well. So it's been definitely
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people.
I mean, that's fascinating. I'm guessing that's quite an interesting period and sort of process then, developing the brief together. Because it must be an intersection between a lot of business requirements. Like, we have these
Yes.
materials available, like you
Yes.
mentioned, cards versus dice versus miniatures, whatever.
Yep.
And we need to sell this many units, and it can be afford to be this kind of box set or whatever. So, like, how do you? I mean, you mentioned there's loads of questions, but how do you sort of work with all of those different moving parts and turn that into like something that works?
Well, it's a complex process, like you say, and often you start to think about the USP. You think, so, well, how is this different from the other things that are out there in the market? In the case of bolt action, there was definitely a part of the brief, possibly a very interesting thing, is that part of the brief was put in there a gizmo, something that is different and becomes the definition of this game. And the ideas were like measuring sticks or templates or the way you move units or the way you base units or something. There was something that needed to be identified as the distinguishing feature of the game. And indeed, that's how the order dice were born. Because basically, given that task, I just went, okay. So it's like, I was thinking, okay, what about? Because I was thinking we went for alternating activation as opposed to I go, you go. And I was like, okay, when I do a game with activations like that, is always one of the things that you need to mark the unit that is activated. And I was thinking, okay, so I need to mark the unit, so I need a token there. Is there something that we could be? And then I went, okay, if the orders are 6 orders and they are on the faces of a dice D6, and the D6 is both the thing that marks and shows what the unit is doing, and at the same time is used to determine the order of activations and put. So I mean, the drawing chits to activate things is not new to bolt action, but putting it together with the order dice, with the 6 orders there, created that dice which is specific to the game, and particularly the drawing the dice and in order, determining the order, I think is very exciting, and is the thing I prefer really when I play, because I still play bolt action as a hobby after all these years. And that combined maybe with the pin mechanics that influences the test. So it became the dice, the bag of dice became the defining thing. And that was part of the brief of, let's have something physical that becomes a definition of this game.
That's fascinating. Yeah, something that is like it's as broad as that. We know we need something, but we've no idea what it is.
Yep. Tried a few things, and that was the one that actually was more and more promising and got really exciting and fun. And we're like, yep, no, this sounds like the best idea. Let's run with this.
Right.
So it was an interesting process, and obviously Osprey got involved as well early on, because of course they were doing the deal with distribution and production. And there's a funny anecdote. I go with with John, Paul. We got to meet Osprey, all the big the big cheeses and stuff, and we have this meeting where we present the idea, and I'm there to present the whole gaming side of things. Well, obviously John was doing the business side and Paul the historical side, and I start my presentation with, I am no World War II expert, blah blah blah, and I was saying, but the point was, but I'm a game design expert, blah, blah, blah. But obviously you can see that when I started like that, Paul and Joe kind of went. the people at Osprey kind of going, the horrified looks. It's like, yeah, right. That wasn't the right thing to say.
Yeah, because it sounds like there's a room. I mean, Osprey, I imagine, and Paul and John from Warlord. That's a room full of historical experts, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, the point is, yes, I had some knowledge. Certainly, I have more after years and years of working on bolt action. Definitely, I'm more into my SK defense Z2 1.10, which obviously at the time I wouldn't know. But I was working alongside people that know that very well. So obviously, for me, this is the game. This is how it works. This is the standardization of anti-tank guns in 4 bands, etc. Then which gun belongs in which entry? At the time, I wouldn't know, or I would know a few, but not every single gun. But obviously, I could count on Paul Sawyer, John Stallard, other people there that would tell me, yes, the 75 millimeter L50 is here. It should be there. So how does it compare with an 88 millimeter? Blah blah blah. All of that, obviously, I had people that I could rely on to put the right things in the right place, to count the rivets and make sure that they were accurate.
Yeah, because I'm really interested about that, actually, because obviously, you've done a lot of work on fantasy and science fiction gaming. Coming into a historical setting, are there any sort of like major differences from a design perspective that you have to take account of there?
There's a few for sure. I suppose one is World War II is still living memory. So obviously that's an aspect that you don't have in fantasy and science fiction, right? You don't have to deal with the sensitivity of elves and orcs, kind of thing. While actually in World War II, yes, one has to be respectful of the people, of all the combatants that were there, and the civilians, and the horrors that happened. So you have to keep that in mind. And yes, when we create, particularly the Army Special Rules, we go for kind of commando comic, a bit of stereotyping, a bit of the Germans are all kind of super efficient and all of that, and the Italians go "Mamma mia" and stuff like that. But so there's an element of that, but you cannot overdo it. You have to kind of be respectful. So that's one thing, that awareness has to be there, which is very different. The other one, of course, is accuracy, because again, there is you can do some things that are really wrong in terms of historically wrong, and people can go, no, this is not, that gun was not used by that unit, or in that period, or in that theater. You put this tank was never used in that theater. You got it wrong. So some things can be effectively factually wrong, while obviously, it's like, oh, that gold dragon, was not particularly allied with this particular faction of elves. You kind of go, yeah. Yes, it was. You just don't know about it. So you can make up stuff and justify anything. While obviously here, and I mean, having said that, when you work on things like Lord of the Rings, still you have to be careful, because it's almost historical, right? There is a lot of detail there and passion. But yeah, so I think it's more similar to working on an IP that you don't own. When you work on a license, you have to respect the canon, if you want, and then in this case, your canon is history. It's very, very well known canon. So yeah, you're more restricted in that, and you have to be careful of sensitivity, not offending people. I guess on the other end, what I find, probably because I'm getting older, is that to me history has more gravitas, in a sense. So it makes the immersion more stronger, more powerful. Thinking, I'll give you an example. Thinking, I don't know, Italian tank crew that has to go into one of their M30 and face Sherman tanks. You kind of go, it's not going to end well, is it? You know that, and yet you have to get into those tanks and go for it. And so the people that fight against odds, where when you know that you don't really, you're a Japanese guy defending an island, and you see this all the might of the U.S. Navy and Army coming at you. You're gonna go, yeah, this is the last thing I'm gonna do in my life. So there is things that feel definitely more powerful in terms of emotions than, yes, the Space Marines making a last statue defense against the tyrannies. It's all very heroic, but it's not quite the same, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, were there any sort of almost mechanical compromises that you've had to make that do kind of that walk that fine line between accuracy and simulation?
Sorry, say again.
So if you're thinking about, okay, well, actually, in real life, the ranges of these weapons would be across the board.
Yes.
We've had to change that sort of stuff. I'm guessing there would be stuff where a tank doesn't quite work in the way it might work in real life in order to make it work on the gaming table.
Absolutely. Yes. That's a discussion that I always have with the Perry twins, because we play games and they always go, what do you mean 12 inches range? What do you mean 24 inches range? You mean this far? The model is this tall and it can fire a rifle up to here? What? It surely should be firing on the other end of this room. And I can go, yes. So obviously compromises have to be made in order to, again, it's part of that briefing and that initial specs where you go, this game is designed to be played on a 6x4 table, and it needs to work and be engaging, and range has to mean something within this 6x4 table. Yeah, of course you could design a system where actually, the range is not quite as important, but again, I guess part of it is the standard that you expect for wargaming, or maybe the habit of designing this type of games. You tend to range is important in terms of making your models move around, because again, often if you have infinite range, because the 6x4, of course, a rifle is always in range, you kind of go, yeah, but that means you have a very static game where you don't need to move. So playing with the ranges is definitely something to invite movement, to invite maneuvering. And yes, some of these decisions are arbitrary, and people will disagree, and they're done to make the game more of a game that works and entertaining. Grenades, like why doesn't everybody have a hand grenade that can lob and create an explosion like an HE weapon, etc.? It's like, yeah, that would slow down if every man was effectively a little mini mortar.
Yeah,
it's just like that would work on a if the scale of the game was a squad. If you had a squad, and then yes, you can get to that level of detail. But on a game that needs to work on units, several units of infantry, etc., if every man is able to lob effectively an HE weapon, etc., it becomes quite heavy. So there's a far more abstract approach, which is like, when you get within 6 inches, then the infantry squad becomes really lethal. There's the point blank dash grenade range, where basically your weapons become far more effective and cover is less effective. And because that represents the squad not just firing, but also lobbing grenades and stuff. So, you have to make compromises. And some of the compromises, the decisions you make, some people will hate, and they will not like the thing you do, that particular decision. And some people will even decide that they don't like the game overall because of some of those decisions, and will find a different game system that maybe deals with those things differently. And so, yeah, it is an important decision. And yes, you can't please everybody with those.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. I mean, one thing I was curious about, just in terms of that early process, I suppose, was obviously at Games Workshop, you'd worked to some extent with John Stallard and Paul Sawyer before. What was it like working with them again at Warlord under this sort of new company and way of working, I suppose?
Yeah, and Rick especially. I mean, I worked a lot with Rick Priestley, and he was my sensei, my mentor, if you want, in Games Workshop, and he taught me what I know. Well, not just him, but he was an important person in teaching me the job. And and more, and how to be a nice person, I think, and a gentleman. So well, obviously, it was, I suppose, an advantage having worked with John and Paul before, because it was a relationship there. There was a trust. There was a respect that we developed over the years. We didn't start. For me, for example, myself and Paul Sawyer had a very rocky start, and we were told to go into a room by a common manager at the time. It's like, you guys get into the room, become peaceful friends, and well, at least make sure you can work together and and come out of that room as people that can work together. So we did, and through the years, I think I like to think that there's been that particularly starting from a rockier position, that there's a respect there. There is a kind of, no, actually, you're good at what you do, and I appreciate what you do, and we can work together very well. And I don't know, I hesitate to say friendship is born, but certainly a very good, close, trusting working relationship. And I have to say that I always say working Warlord Games has always been, like Bolt Action particularly, is one of the best working experiences I had, in the sense that those people influenced the brief, so the high level, but then pretty much stay away from micromanaging the detail, which is a very important thing for a designer, because basically they trust you with the detail. They trust you with the nitty-gritty of the thing. Because I work with other companies where actually which I don't work with anymore, but certainly the process was not that. It was very much a constant changing and tweaking and micromanagement, and it was very difficult to work with. While actually this trust and respect for, these are your skills. I hired you because you are the expert. So I will not countermand everything you say, because otherwise, often you're in a position where you go, why did you hire me if you never listen to or you countermand all of my decisions? So yeah, there was a very good working relationship. There is a very good working relationship with Warlord. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, you mentioned that Rick Priestley got involved as well. I mean, what was sort of his contributions, and how was he inputting into the work on Bolt Action?
Yeah, so Rick got involved a bit later during the process because he was still against Warship, but then he left against Warship and then got into Bolt Action, and so he basically the core design is mine, but then a lot of the refinement is Rick has worked on, and I would say probably the best thing from my point of view is that he's rewritten entire sections and paragraphs, and so basically he made my English sound a lot better than it is my written English, because I tend to write very dry and simple English, because when I try to use an expression, I would probably several times during this interview I used the wrong expression, right? Anyway, I try to be very minimal, because I find that being minimal helps with making less, to keep it simple, basically. Which obviously, I guess, helps with rules writing, is good with rules writing, but I think also makes a very dry and perhaps boring thing to read. While actually Rick's style I think he's one of the best writers that I ever read. I mean, including novel people who write fiction. I think his style is witty, funny, engaging. Is great to read. Basically, makes the experience of reading the rules nice and engaging and very entertaining. So yeah, so basically he did a lot of that. He brought in some. Obviously, we worked on rules and discussed rules and tweaks and bits. Particularly, I remember the recce rule was a big thing where I didn't want it in. Because it's not philosophically, it's not the same as the rest of the rules, where you kind of you activate when you get the dice and the order. And in my head, a vehicle a scouting vehicle could still do the explore and a retreat, but just not in the same turn. It would you try to keep it last thing you activate, so you send him forward at the end of a turn, and then the next turn when you draw the dice, you retreat so you can do the 1-2. You just need to think about it to do it in two turns. Well, actually, I did this mechanic of doing it in the same turn, the recce rule, which I always tease Rick. I call it the Ricky rule. Clearly breaks that logic, that pure philosophy, but and so it triggers some some issues with other rules and stuff. But yeah, but on the other hand, people say, well, that's what that kind of vehicle does, and it represents it better. So again, it's a matter of taste. It's not right or wrong. But Rick helped a lot, and particularly also totally saved me when Armies of France came out, because we had a very late manuscript that eventually didn't turn up, and then was basically me and Rick saving everybody, working stupid hours through the night to get the manuscript done. And so now he's always the person I go to, even with third edition. When I go there and go, Rick, let's play. This is what I want to do with third edition. What do you think? Is there the cover saves and all of that? So yeah, no, I still I'm still lucky that I can count on Rick as a mentor and a friend to help with rules design.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, what do you recall what the sort of initial reaction was to Warlord's Bolt Action as it was coming out? Was it immediate success? Was it what was the sort of critical response like?
Well, it's been a long time now. It was 2014,
Sure.
14 years ago. I seem to remember it did fairly well at release. I think one of the I suppose one of the ways of measuring that is that between 2010 and 2014, we did effectively 2 editions of the game. So that's one every 7 years until third edition came out. And that is, I think, that if you want physical proof that actually the system works, because otherwise you tend to go, oh my God, we need a new edition, quick. So yeah, it was well received, I think. And the sales, Warlord Games did pretty well. I think Bolt Action is still their best system in terms of sales, and so it seems to be both a commercial success and people seem to have fun. And I, frankly, as I said, I play it as a hobby. I find it a fun system. Is the excitement of that draw, I think, that is very exciting. You can imagine the big 2 tanks aiming at each other, turrets tracking, and crew frantically reloading, and which one is going to reload first and be ready to fire first, kind of thing, that kind of thing. Or the sniper tracking the guy that is running, and while something else is going to aim for the sniper. It's those moments in Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan. That's what the game is, in my head, that's what the game is representing, is trying to be.
Yeah, and they are,
cinematic.
like I say, like quite dynamic, quite immersive moment. There's a good storytelling coming from the order mechanic right there. Yeah. I mean, you worked on a lot over that course of that first edition. You did do quite a lot of expansions and supplements and loads of other stuff. I'm guessing you did become very familiar with World War II history and sort of learned an awful lot there.
Yes. I mean, I didn't write them because I never trusted myself to have the historical knowledge of it. The closest I can get to is probably the North African sector, where I've read more through the years, because I had both my grandfather and my grand uncle fighting in that sector, and I had all their stories. I grew up with the war stories, and so that sector means more to me. But other sectors, obviously, I certainly would say no, I know very little about. And so what we did was always to find somebody who knew more about that particular sector or army or whatever, and commission the supplement to them. What my part is to commission, engage, particularly because not everybody that we commissioned, I think, was playing Bolt Action, knew the system. So it was, they contribute the historical part, and maybe, depending on how well versed they are with rules writing, they would go the history and maybe a version of an early draft of the rules part, and I would do the turning their history into rules, into Bolt Action rules, or checking that their rules are compatible with the rule book. And in some cases easier. In some cases, when you have people like, I don't know, Massimo Toriani, right, the Americans, he's a game designer, so, or Andy Chambers, right, the Soviets, he's a game designer. So what you get is effectively an almost finished thing, and you kind of go, right, I need just to check, this point here, so this rule. So it's a tweaking thing, while on the other end, you get people that are not rules writers at all, so you get effectively a very unpolished, okay, I need rules for this tank, I need rules for this unit, this is their historical thing, write me the rules. So there's different levels of of involvement that I had with those books, but they certainly go through all of those books. And yes, so I absorbed quite a lot of World War II knowledge for sure. Yeah.
Did all of that come together with, I mean, I guess everything else you learned about playing the game over those first few years? Like, what went into the second edition that you released?
Yeah, the second edition was really a 1.5 edition,
Right.
really, because and while actually the third edition is really the second edition. What happened is that the second edition effectively was a more conservative thing because we decided to keep the books, the supplements from first edition still on sale and valid, so
Right.
you couldn't change too much because otherwise you would break all the all the books, and that would be a problem. So there was a lot less we could do with the game and with the rules. Some of the things we did were, for example, I remember introducing the templates, and that came from John Stallard playing a game where he saw these units bunched up because he could focus a lot of firepower into, by being close together, and he was just like, "Nope, that looks wrong. Make it go away." So obviously, how do you make it go away? And one thing is trying to write rules where you have to move models separate apart, but then it becomes very mechanical. You have to measure all the time, and it is heavy. So I just went, well, instead of forcing them to spread out, let's persuade them to spread out. So hence templates, where you kind of go, yeah, let's not bunch up too much, right? Which is realistic in a way, you kind of like, yeah, let's not stick all close together because, yeah. Yeah, so it was the changes were far minor than in third edition. Third edition effectively is almost like a new start, and it feels like that. It feels like I have to say that there's more niggles that I will have to straighten either with Rat and FAQs or potentially with a new edition at 2.5, so 3.5 at some point. But certainly, it's because we changed a lot more. There's a lot more things that kind of go, oh, what about this other thing here? What about this unit? How does this unit compare with? So it feels more like a new edition, really a new start, both in terms of those niggles, but also in terms of excitement and sales and the community. I mean, it's amazing. I have to say, I'm blown away by how positively this has been, because you're always terrified, yeah. Or you gotta go, oh my god, am I gonna break the game? But no, the reaction has been very positive. There's a lot of energy. A lot of people are starting to play, which kind of was the point of this edition, because we kind of simplified the rules, the shooting, particularly the core of the game. And I am very, very getting into the tournament scene. Well, a lot more. So I've gone to quite a few tournaments, and getting involved in this, try to direct influence that scene, in particular trying to reduce the dice count, because I think that the experience of playing with too many dice, the game breaks. It's just not designed to work with 24 dice in 2 hours. If you have the all afternoon, by all means, of course, have 40 dice, if you have all day. But in 2 hours, you have to have a cap. Otherwise, it just you can break the game. You can play a game where you play 2 turns because it doesn't work. So yeah, but I'm getting really into it, and it's good. It's fun. It's exciting.
Great, yeah. Yeah, I mean, did that actually, because obviously you mentioned that was part of the original brief, that was that the rule system had to support competitive play. Obviously, there is a competitive scene. Has it grown and sort of been embraced in the way that original brief way back when intended?
I think there's a very robust competitive scene, and I mean, obviously, tournaments are not for everybody, because some people prefer the friendly, relaxed, and the scenario, more historical based scenarios and stuff. So it's clearly not for everybody, but having that community there is good, because it certainly spreads the knowledge of the game, makes it gives it a certain status, and I'm trying to kind of make that community, influence that community as much as I can, to be possibly less extreme, I guess, in terms of the armies that can be built and indeed the dice cap, etc., and the scenarios that are used, trying to make sure that pretty much the ones from the rulebook are used. Because again, if a TO changes the scenarios that are used, that changes the balance of the units. Like, you take away the most the missions where you can get a random from any side of the table, the fog of war mission, and suddenly your gunline armies are a lot more effective, because They're not worried about, paratroopers come on behind us and,
Sure.
is our back secure? So it suddenly changes the game, like having too many dice. And so, yeah, I'm trying to shape it the way I've conceived the game. But again, people are free to do whatever they like with it and do, organize the events however they like it ultimately.
Mm.
So it's not a diktat, is a direction steer.
Sure. Yeah. Was there anything else in that sort of brief for the third edition? Any like big challenges that needed to be conquered, or big changes that were brought in?
The biggest thing that came from outside rather than from me was definitely the change in the army selection process.
Mm.
Because basically there was a desire of making it feel more historical in terms of while the reinforced platoon system we had before is a bit more abstract, a bit more kind of like, tries to do everything and therefore is not doing something. It didn't feel very historical. It
Right.
felt more of a game system. So while the current system is trying to feel more historical, and it does feel more historical, and while at the same time, obviously, still making army selection in a game kind of thing. So, and I mean, a lot of it is we've given people a lot of freedom with these new selectors. So obviously, some people are abusing a lot, as you do, as Wargame do. So you're trying to see, well, is it too much freedom? Well, we'll see. Well, there will be no knee-jerk reaction. We'll have years to see how it goes and see whether see how it's going. But at the moment, it certainly achieved the fact that I see that with my armies, the ones I take to tournaments, I have to redesign them, I have to change them, I have to explore new things, and obviously that commercially is a strong thing because obviously it means that people will be purchasing more models and engaging with the game and discussing things and what's the best combo now, blah blah. So it's seemed to have worked. We seem to be doing well. He's doing really well at the moment. So yeah, we'll try our best to keep it going. And we're now pushing really hard on trying to get all the army books, the core army books out as soon as possible, as fast as possible.
Right, yeah. Is that where the game goes next then? Is sort of refreshing all of the different armies and the theaters and stuff
Yes.
like that?
Yes, the schedule is quite a harsh schedule of trying to go like a book every quarter kind of thing.
Right.
And that means that, so many manuscripts all at the same time is intense. It's very intense. But Armies of Germany is the first one out. Then Armies of the US, Britain, Soviet Union, Japan, and then we'll see. But there's a lot of work there,
Yeah.
which is cool. Keeps me busy.
Sure. Well, yeah, actually, I was curious as well about your other work that you're doing, of course, because you relatively recently sold River Horse, which was your gaming company, and I was interested in what the sort of status of River Horse was and what that means for you going forward as a designer.
Oh, I have to say, selling River Horse was it April this year? Yeah, I'm really very, very happy with that. It is great. I've now. I thought I was going to be less busy. I thought, right, I'll have a lot less stuff to think about, and maybe I can design. I'll write my own book and do these old pet projects that you have for all your life, and you're like, I will have time to do all of these things. And no. No, no. What happened really is that mostly Mantic, that obviously I sold River Horse to, and Warlord Games have kind of gone, ooh, now that you don't have to run a company, you have more time to write games, right? Come here. So basically, I'm designing a lot of stuff for Bolt Action and then the other products around Bolt Action for Warlord Games, and Mantic. I have to look after all the properties that were River Horses, so the Labyrinth and Jim Henson range and the Ghost in the Shell game that now I'm really excited about writing. But also while I'm there, Ronnie was like, "Oh, all right, you can help with this project, this Mantic project, and this other Mantic project, this other." So I am now working on Mantic stuff as well, far more than I was, and therefore, yeah, I possibly say I'm even more busy than before, but in a very different way, as in, like I often say again to Ronnie, is I don't carry the weight economically of those things. So I always say is more relaxing to risk your money than my money. So yeah, it's having borne the weight of a company, thinking the production manufacturing, designing of products, and having staff, having to pay salaries, and doing all the economics of a company is something that was I probably not very well built for it, to be honest. I become too anxious about this kind of stuff and worry about the future. Will I be able to pay the salaries for these people? Their livelihood depends on this, blah, blah. So the weight of my decision don't just influence my life directly, but could have repercussions on other people's livelihoods. So it's not something I have to say, after running a company for 14 years, I'm very happy to having let go of that side of things and just focus on designing games, which is what I enjoy and probably am better at than running companies, to be fair. So yeah, no, I'm really happy with this. And I mean, River still exists as a legal entity. Mantic didn't purchase the LTD. The LTD is still mine, but that now is effectively a vessel for me to sell my services to other people. And I have other customers, not just Mantic and Warlord, but what Mantic and Warlord are my two main customers for sure. That is when I do my sales pitch. Available for designs if you want to contact us. Not quite in the short term, because short term is a bit full.
Yeah, a lot of bolt action in the short term. I
bolt action and Mantic. There's a lot of stuff I'm working on. So yes, the at the moment capacity 0, but maybe in the future there will be time, or not. We'll see. But yeah, it's been good. It's been good.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, Alessio, it's always a pleasure to talk, and I really appreciate you finding the time to chat to me about bolt action and the work that you've done on it. Thank you.
It's been always a pleasure to talk about it. Yes, thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So you were brought in relatively early in the sort of bolt action story at Warlord, right? To support on some of the development that was taking place. How did that come about?
Yes, my involvement with bolt action really started pretty much as soon as I left Games Workshop, as I remember right, because John had already commissioned, or at least talked to Alessio about doing a World War II game called Bolt Action after the range that he'd bought. So John's idea was to have a game to go with model range. Makes sense. And he was thinking in terms of a Warhammery style game, because that's what John likes, and also it's a system that people understand to some extent already. It's out in the marketplace, so it was going to follow the same sort of, not the same mechanics necessarily, but a similar kind of style of combat. So you play on a similar sized table with a similar sized force of troops. And I think John already had that in his head. And then when I got made redundant from Games Workshop, he more or less said, "Oh, why don't you come and help us do this game? Because we could really use some help." And I do remember going out with John and Alessio and just having a meal and probably a curry and a conversation about the game, which John John wouldn't have gone through the formal process of writing down what he wanted, whereas when I briefed stuff at the studio in the days when I did, I always did a written document, partly because it helped me remember everything, but also it helped, by the time you'd gone through a development process, it helped to go back and just check that you hadn't drifted off target, as can happen. So I think I might have knocked together a brief based on that conversation, because I remember one of the elements that I was quite keen on was that the game should have no special components. And then when Alessio came back with the game that he developed, it had special components because it has the dice.
Of course. Yeah.
The order dice.
Yeah.
But it was such a clever idea. It's so smart that I thought, you know what? Well done. You ignored the brief and improved upon it considerably.
Was there a reason that you didn't want any special components? Was that just
because
for
I
like
didn't
accessibility?
think Warlord could afford to do them.
Okay, right.
And it did. It was, to be honest, it was a struggle. It was a struggle. They went through 2 iterations of those dice. The first manufacturer refused to supply any more after the first batch, so that's why you get some of the early dice have got quite square corners, and the later ones have got slightly rounded corners,
Right.
which led to a slightly irritating position where if you've got 2 different styles of dice in the bag, you can feel the difference.
Right. Sure.
Not that anyone would be so bad-mannered as to do that, but that's why. Yeah, no, I wanted to avoid that kind of complication. But other than that, I mean, I thought the system that Alessio came up with was very, very clever.
Yeah.
It facilitated the game that we wanted. I think the aesthetic, as John explained at the time, was going to be maybe you got 30 infantry, which is really a platoon, but you make it function like a company. So you'd give it company level support. So machine guns, maybe anti-tank guns. In many ways, it was actually inspired by the kind of game you get from Charles Grant's Battle, which we might have talked about in the past.
Right.
It's one of the games that influenced 40k and Warhammer in terms of the style of game. So you'd get like 30 infantry, say 3 sections, 3 squads, if you like, of infantry, a few special pieces, anti-tank guns, maybe some bazookas, heavy machine gun or 2. You know, it was that sort of game. And when you had a tank turn up, it'd be maybe 2 or 3 tanks or vehicles, but they would be quite something. So it wasn't a game that was, oh, here's a whole platoon of tanks, here's hundreds of infantry, here's thousands of artillery pieces. Yeah. It wasn't a big scale game. It was that size.
Yeah.
Which is the size that 40k played best at, actually. I remember the 40k 3rd edition, which would have been, mid-90s, I think.
Sure. Would it have been 98 even?
98, yeah, you're right, 98. That was based, the game, the mechanics for that were based on a set of World War II rules me and John had done for playing 15mm.
Right.
In years gone by.
Right.
And in fact, they worked very well as World War II mechanics, and they kind of adapted all right to 40k. But we had some experience of playing games of that kind of size and involving that level of troops.
Right.
So it wasn't too difficult to do. Having said that, once the game became established, Warlord very quickly wanted to make it bigger. Can we have rules for more tanks? Can we have rules for this? Again, well, you briefed it to be within this compass, and now you want it to be within this compass.
Yeah.
Typical, bloody typical.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's often the way. As the range expands, and
it absolutely is.
Always got to be something else.
I hate that as a games designer, because you go, oh, you've just changed the bloody goalpost after publishing it. But these things are inevitable, I suppose. So we did play the game quite a bit, and I would contribute towards it in that sense. I was helping Alessio develop it, but Alessio did the lead development on it. I think I did an edit on the game, but it wasn't that difficult. I mean, Alessio writes very well. His command of English is astonishing for someone his first language is not English, and he would be the first to admit that a good edit is a necessary part of any kind of set of rules, really. So I did that. That wasn't hard. And me and Alessio being good friends, it makes these things easier. It's easy to ask.
Yeah.
did you mean this? Did you mean that? Sort of thing. And then, because Alessio had been commissioned to write it, so it was it would have been for a certain amount of money. He didn't want to write the history section, and so what he did was he subcontracted me to do it. That's kind of why my name's on it,
right?
Because I wrote the history section in the back of the book, and then all those little pieces throughout the book on either I'd be like the machine gun, the bolt action rifle,
right?
The deeds of Charles Upham, double VC winner, the only person ever to win 2 VCs who was not a medic.
Right.
There's only 3 double VC winners, and the other 2 are both medics.
Right.
So Charles Upham, fantastic, interesting character.
Yeah, amazing name. What did he? I'm not familiar with his actions. So what did he?
Well, he won a VC in Crete, saving the life of somebody, and then causing much mayhem amongst the Germans. And then he won another VC in, I think it was Battle of El Alamein, where he basically took out a German machine gun nest with a grenade, injuring himself with his own grenade in the process,
right?
But still carried on fighting, rallied his men, had another go, got captured. But he quite a character.
Right.
Tried, despite the fact he was badly injured, tried jumping from the train that was transporting him into captivity.
Right.
They captured him again, took him to Colditz, and he was one of the guys in Colditz.
Right.
And when he was liberated by the Americans at the end of the war, he first thing he did was break into the armory, get himself a gun. He said, "Right, I'm going to sort some of these Germans out."
Right.
I don't think he did, but
yeah. Gosh.
Quite a character. And went after the war, went back to New Zealand, where he just continued his life as a sheep farmer.
Wow.
But what a character.
Yeah, incredible.
But I wrote a little story about it in the...
Right.
So I did all that sort of thing. And so that was my contribution to Bolt Action. I did a little bit of rules adding at the end, because John wanted me to. He asked me to include a few things that Alessio had, I think there was famously some bits that Alessio had bridled at putting in, right, because he thought that they were unbalancing. And Alessio wouldn't put them in. So John said to me, "Well, Alessio won't put these in. Could you just sort this out?" And I went, "All right, I'll have a go." So I did. And sometimes those were rules. They were things John wanted, and included things like the recce rule.
Sure, right.
Where you could, when you were shot, you could make a move away from the shot. And Alessio always hated having to answer questions about these rules. He always referred to them as the Ricky rules.
Right.
Yes, Ricky rules.
Yeah. Infamous, I think, some of those.
Yeah, I know. Perhaps, I think Alessio was right to be wary, but John was right to want the character and the interest.
Sure.
So, what can you do? You make a compromise. So I did a bit of that. When the second edition came around, my input wasn't needed. People knew what they wanted. It was all very established. Alessio was comfortable doing the rules, and by then he was actually employed part-time by Warlord. So, there was an internal team. They wanted to do the background section in a more dramatic, different manner. Okay, if you must. I've always believed the background in games should be very straightforward and short, because if you want to know about the history of World War II, read a book. There's loads of books about World War II. There's no need to blather on and on about it. And in fact, my original background was just a very, it was a blow by blow. This happened in this month, this month, this month. It was just a long list of kind of what happened, a diary of World War II, just to put it all into context in each theatre. And if people wanted to know more, go off and read about it. Because there's no, you don't buy a set of war games rules to be taught a history lesson, do you?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's been my attitude. Warlord always take the attitude that no, they want to pump it full of as much background information as possible. I go, well, okay. I don't read it.
It's interesting that, though, because obviously I mean, it's based on real history, but it's also the kind of world building of the bolt action game. So in the same way as for Warhammer and for 40k, all of that you say context can actually help immerse you in the game. And
well, that's why I felt that the individual little snippets of actions of heroes or VC winners or whatever, and the information bullets about weapons was interesting because it gives you a context.
Sure.
To put it in fact, some of the photos in that original bolt action are guns from John's collection,
right,
or from my collection.
Oh, right.
So the machine gun, the Vickers, is mine.
Right.
And so I was able to do a little bit of a write-up about it. Vickers is a Maxim. So it was something that was developed at the end of the 19th century and then went all the way through in World War II and beyond, in fact. But as a medium machine gun, perfectly good, serviceable weapon. Yeah, which I've packed away now. I used to have it on display in my Wargames room, which you couldn't see from the road, but my window cleaner could see it, and it frightened him on occasions. As you might imagine.
Just looking in and seeing the armory.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're quite a student of history generally, right? But World War II.
Well, I've always been interested in history,
right?
And particularly ancient history. But yeah, World War II to some extent. When I read about World War II, it generally tends to be strategic stuff or things that are political. Whereas John reads first-hand accounts of people's experiences, usually in action. So we read about, somebody's diary or actions on motor torpedo boats or air crews and things like that. Whereas I don't tend to find that very interesting. It's to me the interesting thing about the Sherman tank is how they manufactured it.
Right.
Because it's an astonishing story. They built a tank around engine capacity.
Right.
And they couldn't build all the engines that they needed for all the tanks, so they went to different manufacturers and used different engines. So things like that. And the story of the British tanks is, again, it's about manufacture. It's about industry. It's not necessarily about them in action. Because by the time they were in action, the troops had got what they'd got. And the fact that the British tanks are on the whole underpowered, you can't do anything about it in the field. What were they doing about it back home? Well, they were developing the Meteor engine. But meanwhile, they're stuck with what were effectively truck engines. So it's often the story. It's like the story of the bolt-action rifle. That story of firearms generally is more to do with the ammunition than it is to do with the actual firearms.
Right.
It's the development of the ammunition that tends to be the deciding factor.
Is that to do with?
Think about it. That cased ammunition that was used all throughout World War II. When it's in the breech, it fires. There's a little firing pin hits the detonator. The detonator explodes. Then the case expands. And that's what seals it. And before that, they struggled trying to make ammunition that's sealed into a breech loader. So you look at the needle gun, which the Prussians developed in the 19th century. The problem with it was that it didn't seal very well. So it was quite relatively low power. So it was all about developing the cased ammunition to work within a bolt action.
Right.
So it's things like that I find much more interesting.
Right.
Only me.
Difficult to make a war game out of some of that stuff, I suppose.
Well, it's not a game. It informs the. To some extent, it does inform the. I mean, it does inform the weaponry, but it doesn't necessarily. The actual gameplay. But even then, the gameplay isn't really based on actual accounts of actions, because real actions very rarely result in that kind of close action combat with different troop types.
Sure.
Real actions tend to be, right, we'll bombard the hell out of them for about 3 or 4 hours with this artillery. Then we'll put down some smoke. Then we'll advance cautiously behind the smoke. The enemy, meanwhile, will go, bugger this, we'd better get out of here. They retreat. those close assault actions against a position, held positions, they're quite rare.
It's always the difficulty, I think, isn't it, with that historical simulation on the tabletop, because you can't get a balanced game. It's not the nature of real war, and like you say, the actual way things play out is quite different. So there is always going to be that sort of a heroic version.
Yeah, I mean, because there are actions that are like that, but they tend to be on a much either bigger scale, like on the Russian front, or we've got. I suppose the war in the Far East could be a little bit more close up, but it tends to be an awful lot of artillery bombardment, and then suppressing fire. Yeah, a lot of time spent keeping your head down.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Did you
the Marshall Report's interesting. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Oh, no, what was that? Sorry.
It's the report that Marshall wrote after World War II, which was about how troops behave in action.
Right.
But it largely based on how Marines acted in the Pacific. So it did give a slightly one-sided view of what combat was like.
Right.
But that's that's one of the things if you're interested in writing World War II or modern war games, that's one of the things to definitely read.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I think Alessio and I probably had enough knowledge of what a war game was to be able to do the job. Alessio knew nothing about World War II when he started.
Right.
Famously, he said as much. We made him watch Hello, Hello. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah, I mean that's a real introduction to World War II history.
Yeah, everything you need to know about World War II, Alessio. Watch Hello, Hello. So it was. I remember going down to Osprey with Alessio and the team, and trying and pitching it to them. So I did. I did that. I helped out. Pitch the game, and again, because my name was associated with it, I think that made it more saleable. Yeah. It was Osprey, interestingly enough, that didn't buy into the dice. They insisted that we did the little table that said number 1 is, I can't remember what it was now. It's a 1 run, 2 advance, 3 fire. The little table, so you could use ordinary dice and didn't have to use the special dice.
Right.
But I saw immediately that special dice were the thing that were going to make this an interesting game. And it almost went wrong because it was so difficult to get those dice made.
Right. It's fascinating that, because that has become almost one of the hallmarks of the game, and it is a feature that is much loved, I think.
I think it's now easier to get dice made than it was then.
Sure. Right.
Even then, we were talking about China, but I think it's now easier. It's not so much difficult to get dice made, but it's difficult to get them made if you want less than 1 million.
Right.
Small quantities were tricky. They're probably not so tricky nowadays. And I've not heard that we've had any problems with the supply since the original supplier went belly up and we had to go to another supplier.
Yeah. And then obviously, Bolt Action, it's continued. It's had 2 further editions. Like you say, you've sort of been less involved in that. Do you
well, they didn't need me for the second or the third one. The third one I had almost nothing to do with. Alessio and I played a couple of games. He wanted just to run it past me. I think John wanted him to run it past me, so we could kind of like both go, yeah, that's very good. We like that. And I liked what he'd done with the system. I thought it was a interesting change. Makes it play slightly smoother. I didn't have any problems with it before, but it is kind of a worthwhile change. I think games tend to naturally run out of steam after about 4 or 5 years. I don't know why. It just seems to be a natural cycle.
That's interesting. What do you think in terms of the players' engagement with it, or like it gets stale?
I think what it is that however well you write or craft the game, it'll acquire barnacles. And some of those barnacles are added in the form of supplements, supplementary material, and they will often drag it down. Sometimes the original concept of the game doesn't stretch to adding the things you wanted to add. And I think that was the case with the original Bolt Action, because very quickly they came up with a tank supplement that enabled you to use more tanks, and so on and so forth. But the rules we did for tanks were based on that original brief. So having light, medium, and heavy tanks was enough, because it was basically an infantry game. But very quickly they wanted to go, well, what about these super heavy tanks? What about these ones that are neither quite here nor there? And we found ways of doing that. But I think that's an example of where what we wanted to do with the game to start with placed a restriction on what we could do with it later on. And it's things like that. And so as I say, after 4 or 5 years of accretion, games tend to feel a bit sludgy. There's just, you're better off kind of making a bit of a fresh start and or having a major overhaul. You always find that, well, in the past anyway, we always found there was a technical thing, because with Games Workshop in particular, as we were growing as a company, the technology changed. So what had been a perfectly adequate production values in 1982 were primitive by 1986 or 87. So if you look at the first edition of Warhammer, which is basically pasted up off what was effectively a typewriter, it was a printer, but it was a daisy wheel printer, to 1987 with the third edition of Warhammer, which is a full colour, properly laid out, nicely illustrated. So our resources were changing all the time. So, and generally getting better. I think 4th and 5th edition Warhammer did go back a little bit, simply because we were short on resources when we did them. But even so, the artwork was fantastic. The models were getting better all the time. We wanted to show them, include them in the games, things like that.
Yeah.
So just to freshen everything up, make it more contemporary.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose you also get, like you say, with all those extra rules and everything that's sort of diffused across loads of supplements, and essential information can be in 3 or 4 or 5 books.
It can, and the difficult thing is doing what Warlord have just done for 3rd edition Bolt Action, because you've gone, right, we're going to have a clean sheet, we're going to start again, the system's going to change, which immediately means that most of what you've done, if not everything you've done, suddenly becomes out of date, and you've got to replace it. So what about my French army? What about my World War II German army? So on and so forth. I'm waiting for the Russian book at the moment. And I think they've done a reasonable job of trying to cover the bases with the army lists that are in the main book. But that's one way of doing it. Just do short, I would say, get you by army list, but Alessio said they're a bit more than that. And I suppose they are. But to my mind, they're what we call a get you by army list. It's something which is not complete or 100% detailed, but which is enough for you to field an army. Which is, what else do you do? I think in this day and age you can put it all online, of course, but I don't think Warlord think in those terms. They're not a very contemporary kind of company. Their mindset is quite 20th century, really.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows where the future will take things, and as it sort of continues to expand, because the 3rd edition has been quite a success so far, I think, hasn't it? It's so much more accessible and such a good starting point for people who are new to it.
Yeah, and the models that have come with it, because they've done new sets of models that are very nice. I think Warlord generally have just continually improved their kits and design standards. I think they suffer a little bit from having different designers, especially early on. You had a lot of different designers, which meant sometimes the models didn't quite fit with each other.
Right.
The ones designed, I think some of the some of the early Japanese, for example, were quite slight and small, but very fine, whereas some of the early American plastics were quite chunky and some big heads, if I remember right.
Okay.
And it's just because you've got different designers, but they've settled down now, and the current designers tend to have a similar kind of look to them.
Yeah, because you want that coherency, don't you? You want it to look like they're all part of the same range, same style.
Yeah, you do. I think the other thing is, and John was very keen when he started Warlord about everything being very kittable. So you make a figure up and you could put all these different arms on, you could put different weapons in all hands, you know. What you end up with, the toy soldiers look a bit like this. They can't do it.
Sure.
They're not holding weapons properly. They're sort of they're sort of grappling with them. And it takes, you can make them work, but you have to cut and bend, and you know, generally you do quite a bit of remodeling. And in the end, I think John himself has come around to the view that no, the less pieces, the better. The fewer pieces, the better. And the less hard work involved, the better. And that's, but it's true of Perry stuff as well. You know, they're all made, they're kits because you have to break them into pieces, but they're not kits because you can put any weapon in any hand and have any hand doing anything. You know, they're not action dolls. Yeah, it's because the body moves. You know, your shoulder girdle moves, so you can't have the same figure in a shooting a pistol pose as you can in a kind of rifle pose. Yeah, it's a lovely idea, isn't it? But it's maybe not as practical as you might want. That's right. It's not. It's not, and all that's improved. And I think Warlord quite rightly want to show off their best quality and most modern models in their books. So when you do a new edition, it gives you the opportunity to refresh all that illustration, all those photographs. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah. Well, I fantastic to chat about Bolt Action. Rick, I really appreciate that. Many, many thanks to Paul, Simon, John, Alessio, and Rick for taking the time to talk to me about their involvement in the creation of Bolt Action. It was a wonderful set of conversations. I really, really appreciate it. If you would like to find out more about the story of Bolt Action, how it was first developed, and how it evolved over time, you can do so by checking out my video on the main Jordan Sorcery channel. It's live right now, and it was really fun to make. If you would like to support the work that I do, investigating and documenting the history of tabletop games and interviewing the people who created them, then you can do so via my Patreon, which you'll find in a link in the description below. And you can also listen to my interviews as a podcast. Just search for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery wherever you get your pods, and you're sure to find it. Thank you once again to all of my wonderful guests. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.